Thank you very much for being here, and this is certainly something I've looked very much forward to be in this very, very fine company. And you know how people say these people don't need any introduction, but I'm going to give it anyway. So we have here Ann Cleeves, writer of the Shetland series, as we call it in Denmark, with Vera. And we have Elly Griffiths here, who has two strong female characters. She has, of course, Ruth Galloway, very much beloved in Denmark. And also a new character, relatively new. We have 2 books out now in Denmark about Harbinder Kaur. And we have here our Danish Anna Grue, who has Anne Maj Mortensen, who is a retired doctor's secretary with a dog. And
dog is very important.
Yeah, and with they're all very sort of strong, and they are not sort of your average beautiful young heroine. They are strong women, and I would like to start with you. And what is it about Vera? I mean, she's slightly annoying, but also very fascinating, very likable at the same time, but very complex. How did you?
I hope so. I love writing Vera. I think she's very competent, very authoritative. I wanted an antidote to those young, beautiful, glamorous women who, especially in American books and on American television, go to work in heels. I've never worn heels, and I can't see the attraction. And Vera definitely doesn't. And I didn't want somebody who was encumbered with a family or with a husband or any of that. So she would hate to be patronized, and she doesn't patronize her team. And she doesn't care what she looks like. And I think she grew, those of you who were listening to me talk yesterday, I think she grew out of the formidable single women who were in the small town when I was growing up. I was born in the mid-50s, and there were women who'd been allowed roles and responsibilities during the war, and they decided they would rather be single than be 1950s housewives. And they were infant school head teacher, or a hospital matron, or a librarian. And I think that's where, not consciously, but I think those are the women that Vera grew from.
So actually strong women who just got on with it.
Just got on with it, were really competent, good at their jobs, wore dreadful tweed skirts frayed at the hem, and thick stockings and sensible shoes.
I can almost picture them.
I think those are the women that Vera grew, and her backstory is quite complex. If you see the show or you've read the books, she was one of those neglected children. Her mother died when she was very young. Her father didn't want her, but didn't want to give her away either. So her act of rebellion, because he was sometime verged onto the wrong side of the law, her act of rebellion was to join the police service at 16.
And Elly, I remember the first time I read one of the books on Ruth Galloway, and I thought, this is a completely different heroine as well. Just the fact that she wasn't really very beautiful. She doesn't feel good about herself in a swimsuit and so on. How did you come up with Ruth? I mean, what is she made of?
Oh, it's such a nice description of her. Mind you, I have to say the only thing about Ruth is having gone to the trouble of writing a character who's not very glamorous and doesn't care what she looks like. The number of people who say to me, "You're just like her." And I feel like saying, oh, thank you. but thank you, because I know it comes from a nice place. So Ruth did sort of, I think all writers have this moment where I was, and I do apologise because I know I've told so many of you this before, but I was walking across a bit of marshland in North Norfolk with my husband, who's an archaeologist, and he mentioned that prehistoric people thought marshland was sacred because it's neither land nor sea, but something in between. They thought it was a bridge to the afterlife, neither land nor sea, neither life nor death, like a liminal zone. And as soon as he said that, the idea for a book came into my head, and I did sort of see Ruth walking towards me. And I teach creative writing, and I'd never let my students get away with that. Hey, I saw her looking at me, I saw her. But you know, she did suddenly appear, and I didn't know everything about her. And yes, she's an archaeologist, obviously inspired by Andy, I guess. And she lives on her own with her cats on a sort of beautiful but deserted bit of North Norfolk coastline. So having said that, she sort of arrived organically, but I think, like Anne, I was very determined to write somebody who wasn't like, and I think it generally is those American books, isn't it? Where,
I think so,
where
yeah.
you have this impossibly beautiful heroine who runs like 20 miles before breakfast, and then she makes amazing gourmet food, and literally everybody in the book is in love with her. And I think she was quite a conscious decision not to be like that. And again, to be somebody who, like Vera, is very competent in her job, very good at her job, very confident in her job. But she also is not super confident in other parts of her life, like she never knows what to do with a scarf. No. I always really admire women who can do...
I love the part with the scarves.
I really admire women who can do scarves. I've got two stylish sisters who can do scarves, you know, but I can't do scarves. So, yeah, I think she came from that place and wanted to write about somebody who was very good at her job, but didn't know what to do with a scarf.
That's
and,
funny.
Then finally we come to Anne Mortensen, who
Yes.
is something quite different. She's a very opinionated
Elderly
woman. Yes,
woman,
yes.
yeah. She looks
I'm
like Mrs. Hyacinth. Yes.
Oh,
So-
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had written at that point in my life several books about a bald private detective called Dan Sommerdale, and I was kind of fed up with, you know, the crime scene and the tough stuff, and you know. So actually, I had been planning Annemai for quite some time, because I thought, look at us, who are reading crime novels. We're women in a certain age. A lot of us has grey hair. A lot of us are actually quite clever. We can solve very difficult crime puzzles. We can cook very complicated meals that the young people can't. We're probably not as slim and fit as we'd like
That's
to
due
be.
to the meals,
Yeah.
you know.
And I thought, this is quite what you call quite strange, that we always read about women who doesn't look like us at all and doesn't think like us at all, because we're the ones spending the money on these books. And then I wrote about myself and Mrs. Hyacinth and a bit Miss Marple and all the side characters in this book. Her grandchild, her daughter, the police woman with whom she is cooperating, the journalist, all of them are women. And none of them are beauties, but they're very, very clever. And actually, I think I write the original Krimi, because it's these strong women are very important to me. I think it's so funny.
And did any of you ever encounter any resistance from, say, your publishers, your editors, who said, no, we should go with a beautiful young woman, and this is not how it's done, or did it just pass through and they say, yeah, this is really clever?
Well, the first book, the first of the Vera books, was supposed to be a standalone novel, because I did have a very young, trendy editor, and I think she was a bit dubious about the whole thing, about an older woman being actually quite good at something. So,
A bit worrying.
but I was fine. She married a music journalist and moved to Australia. So I was then able to write more Vera books, and I
For this
loved
we are
writing
grateful.
yeah, I was very happy.
But is it true that, I know we've talked about this before, in The Crow Trap, more than halfway through there's a knock on the door, and you didn't know who was going to be there, and it was
Vera.
It was Vera, and
Yeah.
isn't that amazing?
No, the young journalist really didn't want a detective in this book, because with the arrogance of youth. She thought that nobody was going to read traditional crime fiction anymore. So she wanted me to write this book that didn't have a detective in it. And I started writing the book, and then I got very stuck because I don't plot in advance. And I was writing a funeral scene. And I took Raymond Chandler's advice, and he said, if you're stuck with a plot, have a guy burst through a door with a gun. But I don't do guns, so I'd had the door burst open. And like you seeing Ruth Galloway walking across the marsh towards you, in came Vera, and I had her name. I describe her as looking more like a bag lady than a detective. She's got all her notes in a plastic supermarket bag.
So good. Does she have a hat?
No, the hat comes from the television.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
She doesn't wear a hat in the book.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, she might do, but I don't tell you that she does.
I think that's wonderful.
As I recall it, Vera is so well dressed that she goes into a charity shop and buys a new coat.
Yeah.
Anna told me this yesterday, and nobody noticed she bought something new.
It's exactly the same as the coat she's always been wearing.
Yeah, I think, I just love Vera. I think that's wonderful. I didn't have, well, actually, so I had written 4 books before, all under my real name, which I know a lot of you know is Domenico De Rosa, which I know sounds made up, but is my real name. So I'd written 4 kind of books, and they were all about sort of Italy, really, because where my family are from, and sort of families and relationships. But I guess they were sort of glam in their way. And then when I had this sort of fateful trip across the marshland with Andy and thought of this character, Ruth, my publishers didn't want the book. They didn't want it at all. They said, oh, yes, well, we've already got a crime novelist, so we don't really want this. Why don't you write something else about Italy? But, you know, I love Italy, of course, and, it's very proud of my heritage there. But, all the books about Italy, they've all got that, that farmhouse, that house that's on every book about Tuscany.
Yeah.
They've all got that on the cover. They've all got beautiful girl with a glass of wine. And I remember one of them, the last one that I did, they added a subtitle which I didn't write, and it was Falling in Love, Italian Style. and actually...
Ruth would never do that.
Exactly, Ilona. And actually, genuinely, the book was about the resistance. It was about the resistance.
So it wasn't about...
There was, maybe a bit of Italian love, but you had to do 200 pages before you got there. So when I wrote this Ruth book, they didn't want it. But luckily, my agent, first of all, she told me to get a crime name. So I became Elly Griffiths. And then we went to a different publisher. So we went to this brilliant British publisher called Quercus, who were independent then, but now they're part of the Hachette group, because I guess it's like that here, everyone moves around, and that's all great. And there was a brilliant editor there called Jane Wood. And actually, she and I have the same birthday, but she's 20 years older than me. And she read the book, and she loved Ruth. And she said, no, we're good. And actually, I said to her, shall I be E. Griffiths? Because quite a lot of people had their initials. Yeah. And she said, absolutely not. She said, this is a book that women will like. Yeah. It's about a strong woman main character. I wanted, actually, Elly Griffiths, my grandmother was called Ellen Griffiths. And so I wanted to be Ellen Griffiths. But I did become Elly, and I'm not quite sure why. And I did ask Jane, and she said, well, I think it looked a bit tidier. So there you are. But thanks to Jane, she loved Ruth, she championed Ruth, and she changed my name to Elly, so that's fine.
That is fine.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Because it's a lovely series, and it's a lovely character.
Thank you.
I really like Ruth, and I the first time I encountered in a book, I laughed.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I don't know why I laughed. I just laughed because I recognized her, her style and her humor. And
but I think that's something our books, all of us, including Lola's, have is humor.
I think so too, and that's perhaps because we write about elder women.
Yes.
We write about mature women who don't have to spend as much time before the mirror and thinking about how do I look to men, and is this karate kick, is this becoming, and so on. I think it's more relaxed, and then we can have a lot of humor in there.
But Anna, did you have any difficulties in selling the idea about Annemite?
No, I didn't.
That was a
Because,
walk-in.
yeah, I have a lovely editor, and I have worked together with Anne for years in another publishing house. And she left to Lindhardt and Ringhof, so I left with her. And this was kind of a common idea, I think. Well, Anne would say something else, but I think it was a common idea because we agreed so much. We could see Anne Mai to us right away.
Yeah. And you touched a little bit upon it before when you said, well, they don't spend time in front of the mirror, so they actually do have time to solve crimes. What is it that women of a certain age can bring to the table when it comes to crime solving? When you look at the more traditional writing, it's usually a very strong male lead character, or it's a beautiful woman, also clever. But here we have sort of a range of, dare I say it, more complex figures. And they're not necessarily, Vera is connected to the police, but Ruth is, an archaeologist, and Anna Mai is a retired doctor's secretary.
Yeah.
So that must also bring some challenges. But what is it that these women of a certain age, what do they bring? Their experience, of course, but what does that do for the crime novel?
I think with Vera, because she doesn't have a family and because she has a very complicated relationship with her father, she brings total focus. So her family is her team. When she joined the police service, she found her tribe, the people that she belonged with. So her second in command, Joe Ashworth, I think he's her surrogate son and her conscience. So he's the person that keeps her on the straight and narrow because she is so focused on finding justice. And sometimes she actually queries her motives. How can she actually morally find such pleasure and such joy in murder? And she knows that it's not a good thing, but she is so into it and so wants to find justice, that when she finds out that a crime isn't suicide but murder, her heart lifts. And she knows that morally that's wrong, but it still does.
There is a lovely sort of, feeling to your books as well, I think, because the team and the way they work together, there's a real warmth to them, I think.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think kindness is a very underrated characteristic. I like people who are kind.
Yeah.
So do I.
So
I don't like
warmth and
sadistic
compassion
serial killers.
No.
It's kind of boring.
But it's
There's one more thing that the three of us have in common now I'm thinking about it. None of us are in the big cities.
No.
And it's not night all the time or raining all the time and nobody is shooting all the time. It's province, hedder det på engelsk?
Yeah, provincial,
It's rural crime.
And it's sort of on the edges, isn't it, of society, which I think is really...
And we have a lot of nature all the time.
Yes, and living in nature. And I think also having an older character, does mean that you do have a lot of backstory, which is pretty useful, isn't it? And
it is.
and there's a little bit of a trend, I think. Richard Osman, some of you may have read his books, which are really good. Thursday Murder Club's the first one. And it's about a group of older people in a retirement home solving crimes. And of course, people who have lived that long have really interesting stories. They've done lots of things.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, Vera's backstory and your character's grandchildren, and they add to it, don't they? They add a richness, and people have just lived a long time. And I think in one of my other series, I've got a character who I like very much, who's 19, and it's fun to write about a 19-year-old, but they haven't done anything, have they?
No,
You know,
yeah,
what's there in their, well, maybe some 19-year-olds have. Please don't tell me if you have, but I know some have. But I hadn't done anything at 19, perhaps I should just say that. But, you know, when you get older, you have done things and you've made mistakes and you've met people along the way. And
They have contacts,
Contacts,
don't they?
yes,
Which are
yes.
useful if you're solving crime. You know people.
Yes, because Vera, in the recent book, she meets her old school friends, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And so you've got that, you know, that history and that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a...
I've very often thought about, I prefer Miss Marple to Hercule Poirot. And the reason I like Marple the best, I've been thinking a lot about it, it's because she always uses human experience.
Yes.
She solves all the crimes by having an association.
Yes.
You see, that is like that naughty Peter who put that
Yes.
frog
It
in
was
the
just
clock.
like little Jimmy.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
No, he was called Tommy.
Little Tommy,
The one
yes.
with the frog, yeah. Yeah, you can have that story another day. I really like that because she has 80 years of experiences and she uses them. That's her weapon.
And
She
she's
would
overlooked,
never
isn't she?
ever punch somebody, but she can remember stuff and she knows stuff about
And
it.
people
Much more
overlook-
hard-hitting.
Yeah,
And
I
people
love her.
overlook her, don't they?
Yeah.
People don't listen.
They underestimate her, and that's
Yes.
what you do to mature women, but don't.
But I think
Very, very dumb.
I think that's what all our characters have
Yeah.
in common because
Yes.
they're bigger, they're not beautiful, they are underestimated. And that's how they can be so clever and solve crimes so well, because people don't think that they are like that.
No.
They underestimate them and overlook them.
And they're also good observers because they're not embroiled in, you know, looking nice and, you know, the men's glances. But this brings me to a subject I'd like to introduce into the conversation, which is the love interest. Because that is always, you know, something that most crime novels also have.
That's yours.
And I know, maybe Elly, you stand out a little bit here, but I still think you've done it slightly different than we normally see. But I'd like to talk to you all about, you know, how did you consider this? Should there be a love interest? Will there be a love interest? Could there be one? And why not, or why?
Well, Vera doesn't have a love interest. I think because, and people do write to me and say, oh, she's so lonely, can you not find her a partner? Can you imagine living with Vera? That would be just, and she's alone and she's a loner, but she's not lonely.
No.
And
No.
what she longs for at the end of the day is to go back to her house in the hills and pour herself a whiskey and be there on her own and enjoy that space and that time alone. And in the TV series, occasionally men float past her, and I worry that they're going to make her fall in love or have some... But no,
Hardly.
I don't think she will.
No.
I think she likes being on her own too much.
Yeah.
I think it's nice to write about that, to write about some people, you know, it's a happy existence, you know, and it's a fulfilled existence. It doesn't need to... I suppose Ruth does have this, anyone who's read my book, so the 12th one has just come out in Danish, but I've just written number 15 in England. And throughout the whole series, there is a love interest between Ruth and the detective, DCI Harry Nelson, and it's very complicated.
Very.
And it only gets more complicated as time goes on, really. But I think at the centre of it is the fact that Ruth loves Nelson and Nelson loves Ruth. But Ruth does pretty much like living on her own with her cat, you know, and her daughter. So it's not that she's desperate to have Nelson living with her. And I think Nelson she says a few times, he just takes up too much space, you know.
Yeah.
There's just
Can
too
I
much-
just add here that last year I interviewed Elly in Elsevier, and I asked her, will they ever, you know, have each other? Come on. And then Ruth did something clever. She asked in the audience, do you think Ruth loves Nelson? And everybody was like, yeah. yay. And do you think she would like to live with him? And everybody went, no.
I always love it with the audience. Quite often it's a lot of women, and you know, does she want to live with him? No, you know, it's like, yeah. Well, that's the issue, I think.
And what about you?
Anna, she's not a cold woman at all. She was very much in love when she was young, and she had her baby Eben, but her husband was kind of a jerk. He left her when she was pregnant, and she never really got over it. And I think that's one of the reasons she never lets any men into her house. She's not a lesbian, but she doesn't want interference. I think she perhaps had a couple of affairs when she was a bit younger.
Sounds interesting.
But I don't know anything about it, and I know
Maybe that will emerge later.
her grandchild, Didi, she's very worried about her grandma and thinks that she should have a boyfriend. And at one point in one of the books, number 3, she actually contacts an old widower in this small city, and she arranges that they should meet and fall in love. And Annemai is horrified. This old man, what should she do with this old man? He has hair out of his ears. So no, I killed her love life a long time ago, and I can't see it coming.
Well, you never
But
know.
she loves her dog.
Yes, well, if you've got a dog or a
Mr.
cat,
Mortensen,
yeah.
That's the dog.
Yeah. But when talking about Miss Marple, I got to write a Miss Marple story last year for an anthology, and we were only given 3 rules for that, which was that we couldn't write about the young Miss Marple, which is a bit of a shame.
No.
She couldn't meet Poirot, and she couldn't fall in love.
No.
So those were the 3 rules, which felt a bit mean, really. But I guess if you wrote a short
Marble.
No, I think it's quite fair.
Yeah, and I think it is, because I think if she did fall in love, that would be the story, wouldn't it? So, but I think it's interesting that that's part of this Miss Marple that we love, is that she's probably had. I can't remember now whether Agatha Christie gives her any backstory, but some TV has done. Did she lose someone
but
in the
it's
war?
very vague.
She lost somebody in the
First
war.
Yeah.
I think Hercule Poirot has had a wife and a child.
Oh, yes.
But they were killed in some war.
And
probably
he was in the
Great
police,
War.
wasn't he?
He was in the police in
Yes,
Belgium.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
But Miss Marple, I really think she's a virgin.
Oh,
She has had some.
you heard it here
kind of-
first.
Yeah.
I think
love
you're right.
Miss-
I love Miss
I
Marple.
love.
So do you think you can't be interesting and have a happy home life and be a good detective as well, or is that too much of a stretch? Or
Well, I think Anne does that in the Matthew Venn series. He has a happy marriage.
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah, I also write a series set in North Devon, and my detective there, Matthew Venn, is gay. And it's the only happy marriage that I've ever written about. And I love writing the relationship between him and Jonathan, his husband.
he? Yes, I love that.
So, and it's great fun
It is.
to write.
It is hard, though, I think, to write. I always think of Busman's Honeymoon, you know,
Dorothy Sayers,
Sayers, which is the book when Peter and Harriet marry, and they're on a honeymoon. They're clues in the title.
Oh, the
really,
one
isn't
with the
it?
cactus.
Yes, you know,
And
one
the
with
port
cactus.
wine.
But actually, although it's a really good story, it's her last story about them, last full-length book about them, I think she wrote, and they are a bit annoying when they're together.
Yeah,
they
they are.
keep quoting Italian poetry.
The worst one
to
is
each other.
Gordon and I,
Oh.
when they're in Oxford and they're conversing in Latin.
Oh,
and
yeah.
go away.
Give us
You're
a
so annoying.
give us a break. He calls a domino.
I quite like that.
Totally
I'm so
agree.
soppy,
But
I really enjoyed it.
The funny thing is, our detectives are single. They are elderly women. They don't like all these men in the house. But
Just
we
a
are happily
distraction, I
married. I
think.
don't know about you, but we're married, both of us. I've been with my husband for 46 years, and I have no plans
Well,
of leaving him.
I was with my husband for more than 40 years, and he died 5 years ago, and that's when I started writing Matthew Venn. So I wanted to write about a happy marriage, but perhaps not a conventional happy marriage, because I did have a very happy marriage.
Yeah. So that's
I
kind
should
of
say I have
funny,
been
isn't
happily married for 30 years, even though he hasn't read any of my books, but still married.
He has.
Maybe that's exactly why.
That's why. You're
Perhaps,
absolutely, you're not
perhaps.
wrong, Lorna, yeah.
My husband has only read 16 crime novels. They're all mine.
My husband's
So he thinks I'm a genius because
Best
I write
crime.
about murders
Oh,
and
that's great. Well, my husband's a big crime fan, loves the Ann Cleeves, but he hasn't read, but that's fine. I think, as Lorna said, that suits us.
Well, one of the things I'd also like to talk to you all about is, and that actually starts with Anne Mortensen, because I have a neighbor who's very, very interested in crime novels, and she sometimes comes over to me and talks, and she said to me, "Have you read the books about Anne Mortensen?" And I said, "Yes, I have." "That's me. I'm her."
And do you know how many women say that to me?
Exactly, and that's my point. You know, because we write about maybe someone who are not that unobtainable as a person. They're not sort of up on this pedestal. They're still special, but they are somehow, you know, somebody that the readers maybe can see themselves more in. Is that something you've all had experiences with? When you get feedback from your readers that they can actually.
I'm not sure many of my readers would really like to be like Vera.
She's very eccentric.
I identify. I'm very scruffily dressed often.
I think they probably want more out of life than work, and I think Vera is so focused on her work that she doesn't have time for anything outside, and I think that single-mindedness makes her a little bit sad and a little bit lonely.
People do say to me that they see themselves in Ruth, and I always take that as a big compliment. I think that's great, and I think you're absolutely right about a lot of our readers are these intelligent women doing these jobs, and I do think, you know, I'm so grateful that my books have been so brilliantly received in Denmark and in Scandinavia generally, and I wonder if there is something as well about strong Scandinavian women that really like this sort of character, you know. I don't think I'd get a room this big in the UK, you know, I really don't. Well, I'm shared with my colleagues here, but, you know, I think there is something, you know, that appeals to Scandinavians about these particularly strong women. But yeah, people do say they see themselves in Ruth, and I'm always really scared when someone says, "I'm Ruth, I'm an archaeologist," and I think, oh no, you're going to find a mistake in my books. But I recently met a lovely bookseller from Scotland, and she was called Ruth Galloway. So I thought that was very
that's
cool.
lovely.
Yeah. And she was quite Ruthish, I have to say. So, yeah.
That's nice. In the beginning, when I wrote the Anne series, a lot of people hated Anne. They thought she was obnoxious and pushy, and she is. And they really didn't like her. And why didn't I write some more Dan Sommerdale books? But then in number 2, they quieted down a bit. And in number 3, they actually began to love her. And it's really funny that if you write about a character that's very complex and a bit annoying and so on, not a heroine, at some point people begin to love her. And I'm really glad that a lot of people see themselves in her instead of saying, "Oh, she's so irritating."
Sometimes when people say, "Oh, she's so pushy," you do wonder if they would say that about a male character.
Yeah, they wouldn't.
Because, you know, Poirot's quite pushy, isn't he? And, you know...
And quite irritating.
Really irritating, yeah. I mean, Agatha Christie got irritated with him, didn't she? But, you know, we sort of accept male characters being driven and work-focused like Vera, but maybe people don't always expect that from... we have a mutual friend, William Shaw. I don't know if any of you have read his books. He's really good. He's got a female main character called Alex Cupidi, and in the first book about her, she does something which any police officer would do. Any police officer, it's her duty to do it, and she does it. And people were writing to William, I hate that woman. She's so horrible. So, of course, William, being a true writer, thought, I'll write more about her. And I think you're right that people love her now. But but nobody would have complained, I don't think, about a male police officer doing what Alex did.
But do you think that's true in general, that women aren't allowed as much slack as men are in crime novels?
No, we can't be pushy and sloppy and ugly.
Yet our characters here on stage, they are annoying. They're badly dressed. They are a little bit pushy. Very independent.
Sorry.
Is there some kind of feministic message here, or is it just that's the way women are today?
I never thought about it like that, consciously. But,
no, I was going to say subconsciously. I think we're standing up for women who have been actually despised until quite recently. The women who don't fit the stereotype, who don't go along with wanting to please other people, who are happy in their own skin. And perhaps we are standing up for all those women who found it difficult to be like that. I hope so. I hope that's what we're doing.
I think that's true. I am a feminist, and I think there is maybe even subconsciously that message in the books, that...
but you don't think about it when you write it,
No, I don't think so.
I don't either.
No, I don't think
it's just...
Because I think writing is like acting. We get inside the heads of our characters and we look at the world through their eyes. And so when we're writing, we're living that character, and we're not really making judgments about her or thinking about, we're just being her for a bit and thinking it as she would think.
Yes.
And then afterwards we can go back and say, oh, that's quite provocative.
Yes.
That's quite a feminist statement, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like when a reviewer or something, sees some very clever metaphor in our books, and you think, oh, yes, yeah. I remember somebody said, Elly Griffiths uses the sea as a metaphor for human unkindness, and I thought, yes, I do. I'd never thought of it.
That's funny.
A good thing for those reviewers. So, like you said, we are inside the head of our main character when we write. And I know for certain when I write, I love my main character, but sometimes she annoys the
shit out of me.
Is there anything about your main characters that really annoy you? Just between us four.
I think we forgive our characters because we're so close to them that they might annoy other people, but I don't think they annoy us. Do you think?
I don't know. I have to say Ruth does annoy me sometimes. Obviously just between us here. But
what does she do that annoys you?
She does. She's quite passive, which I quite admire as a characteristic. So, and I was saying this to Rebecca Anderson yesterday, that I quite often type the words, Ruth said nothing. So in a situation where lots of people are saying things, Ruth might say nothing. And I always think that if someone were writing a book about me, they would never say, Elly said nothing. Because, I would say something, like if you're in a seminar or something and any questions, there's always one tedious person who has their hand up, and then I realise it's me, it's, oh no, here she goes again asking a question, that's so boring. So I do admire that about Ruth, but I find sometimes she's quite passive. And the other thing that I can say to you is, I've worked so hard to give Ruth another love interest than Nelson. I have created Frank, who frankly is lovely, he looks like George Clooney.
But he isn't Nelson.
He's a historian, the cat likes him. The cat prefers him to Nelson. But will Ruth
Cats
go
are
off?
clever.
The cat knows that Nelson's a threat. Will she go off with Frank? No, she won't. It's very annoying.
But that's life.
It is life. Yes. So, and that's how characters sometimes do annoying things. What about Anna Mai? Does she ever annoy you?
But her most annoying feature is actually one I enjoy rather much because she's so prejudiced.
Yeah, she's full of prejudice.
She has a lot of fordomme. She hates beige very much. She can rant 2 pages about beige and how it's almost an affront to the eyes that anybody will wear this color. She really hates people who can't cook themselves. She's, she looks down on people who can't.
It's a hilarious scene in book number 2 where she's staying in a spa.
Oh yeah.
And the food is not quite up to scratch. So
yeah, so she makes a list of all the errors the cook makes, and then she sets up a meeting with him because she wants to, give him some tips, some
creative, constructive criticism.
Yeah, some some points. And she expects him to be very grateful, and he isn't.
Well, actually, I think it's really funny because he says, "Yes, I'll take that on board," and then she went away from the meeting thinking that went rather well.
But sometimes it is fun to write about characters with those sort of. With me, it's the detective Nelson. He hates pumpkin-flavored coffee, which sorry, anyone would hate that. He hates wheelie suitcases. He hates saunas. There is quite a list of things that he one day wants to make illegal. And I do quite like writing that.
Yeah,
I have to
exactly.
say, writing those.
Because my prejudice.
I love a wheelie suitcase, but the rest is all me. Yeah.
But everybody else's wheelie suitcases are so
true. Yes, getting in my way.
I hate to say this. We're going to have to wrap this up very soon because I love this, and I could be here for hours. But there are other people clamoring to go on stage. But finally, I'll just ask you very briefly if you could sum up your main character in a few words, and what is the essence of Vera and Ruth?
She's
and
strong, she's competent, she's self-confident, she refuses to be patronised, and she won't patronise her team, but she's coming to realise that giving them a few scraps of praise, she'll get a lot more out of them.
I say Ruth is she's a strong, intelligent woman. She's a forensic archaeologist. She's very confident at work. She knows exactly what to do with a dead body, but she doesn't know what to do with the scarf.
And Annemai is pushy, but she's very, very warm, very responsible. She loves her family, and she's very prejudiced. But she's very, very introvert. And that's something a lot of people don't know about her. She really needs her solitude.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful. And I can just say to the audience, I cannot recommend the books enough. I mean, just go on board if you haven't. If you are already reading the series, get the newest one. These 2 wonderful ladies, they will be signing at Gads Forlag. So go and get your copies. You will even get a signature in them. And Anna will be signing at Lindhardt and Ringhof immediately after this as well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna.
Yeah, thank you.
It was so fint.
Thank you.
Thank you.